Now, when I taught virtue ethics this year, I knew that some of you struggled with the idea of moral saints presented by Susan Wolf, even though I told you it was my favourite idea. And I'm going to try and give you a really quick run through on how to use Susan Wolf and how to interpret her major work on moral saints. Don't forget to think of her as the no-nonsense philosopher from New York, and we heard her speak at the University of New York as well in lessons. Actually, you guys probably won't know what that is. I'll try something else anyway. The first thing that Susan Wolf's going to do is talk to us about this idea of a moral saint. And a moral saint is someone that's exactly what it sounds like, someone who's as morally good as possible, and they cultivate virtues, they have a high standard of moral virtues, and they do things like, there's lots of ideas represented here by Susan Wolf, but I think you get the picture. If you imagine someone that's so moral, they even manage to not to favour people and to actually be impartial all the time. You probably know people like this, people that it seems to be a part of their nature to do the right thing and to have equal concern for a number of people, don't tend to pick sides, don't make negative judgments of other people, for example. And she calls these people moral saints and then separates them into two categories. The first is the moral saint out of love. This is someone with a high degree of compassion and concern for others, and the loving saint only feels happy when making other people happy. So this is someone that is very giving to other people and concerned with other people, so they might be altruistic. Another key idea of being a loving saint is that they don't so much enjoy material comforts, consumption, that kind of thing, but instead they get happiness, they derive enjoyment from engaging with others and from the happiness of other people. The rational saint, you might think of someone like Immanuel Kant as a rational saint. The idea of someone that doesn't just gain happiness emotionally from helping other people, but instead has rationalised the importance of doing so. Someone that has thought a great deal about moral issues, and they pay no attention to their own happiness because they place overriding importance on wider morality. Now, here's what's key. A rational saint, Susan Wolf is saying these people are moral. Fine, they're very moral, but they're actually sacrificing their own interests. And what she's interested in is whether or not someone that sacrifices their own interests can be a positive influence or an attractive ideal to work towards. Most ethical theories try to encourage us to follow suit. Well, are we going to follow these loving saints and rational saints, or is there something that perhaps will be even more influential? So here we get a bold statement from Susan Wolf. She says that aiming for absolute moral perfection is not a good model of well-being for us all to strive towards. So we should not all become the rational saint, and we shouldn't all become the loving saint either. That's a perfect love heart. We shouldn't be striving towards those things, because even though it's a type of moral perfection, we wouldn't be giving ourselves the right type of personal well-being. She says that actually a moral saint is too morally good for their own well-being, because they have all of the moral virtues, fine. They have a great deal of moral virtues, but they actually lose non-moral virtues. Now, non-moral virtues for Susan Wolf make people interesting and worthy of living, a life worthy of living. So the their moral saints don't have enough interests and personal characteristics. Her quote here is that it tries to explain that people wouldn't have developed their own character if they're always feeding hungry or healing the sick or raising money for Oxfam. Then they're not reading Victorian novels, playing the oboe, or improving his backhand. Careful, Susan. The problem with a moral saint is that they don't develop non-moral interests, and if you think about the type of people you want to be like, they may have many non-moral interests that you think are a significant feature of their personality. And even Aristotle and Plato both talked about the importance of role models. Susan Wolf might be suggesting that as a virtue ethicist, she's contributing here to virtue theory, even the idea of being moral is in itself should be viewed like a virtue, in that you can have it to excess or you can have a deficiency, and what we want is the right amount of morality. The right amount of morality will give you the time to develop a cynical or sarcastic wit.
Okay. How about this? You know how you're always trying to learn about sarcasm?
No.
No?
I was being sarcastic.
For example, you might develop an interest in gourmet cooking and high fashion, like, let's say, for example, Nigella Lawson.
This is quite a lot of salt, I know, but Italians say that the water you cook pasta in should be as salty as the Mediterranean, which is such a wonderful poetic idea. Sort of life, food, culture, everything, all in one.
Thanks, Nigella. And the problem with the moral saint is that the moral saint has to always try to look for the best in people and give people the benefit of the doubt, and improve all regrettable situations, and have to be very, very nice and not be offensive. Thus they might be dull-witted. But it's of course your decision whether you think that never being offensive is a bad thing. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily want someone who only had a cynical, sarcastic wit and interest in gourmet cooking and was more than happy to be offensive. Then everyone would act like Gordon Ramsay.
You put the thick stuff in, you add the runny to it.
That was a brilliant idea, Chef.
That's a brilliant idea, Chef. You think this is funny, don't you?
No, I don't think
So we're serving liquid...
That's enough of him. Some people might say that she's offering some sort of common sense to it. You might say that she's limiting morality to giving morality a ceiling, basically. But she argues that if we want people that are going to be talented or accomplish great things, like Audrey Hepburn, who was gorgeous, or Paul Newman, who's gorgeous, then we're going to need to focus on all sorts of virtues and not just moral virtues. And that's why we're going to have to perhaps look past this idea of moral saintliness. That is, people that either rationally or compassionately always only choose to do the right thing with their entire life. And then in the section at the bottom we have her basically arguing that people would tend to agree with her if we think about how we prefer certain types of people over other types. Her examples might not mean very much to you: the mischievousness and the sense of irony in Chesterton's Father Brown, to the innocence and undiscriminating love of St. Francis. But one of her other examples is that we all actually prefer, we all actually prefer Han Solo to Luke Skywalker. And I think most people would agree. Most people would say that Han Solo is the character that they look up to and were most impressed with. Han Solo was brave, but he wasn't boring. He chased after Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, from the start of the movie. He was really arrogant, and when she finally got back into him... he was funny. She's basically questioning the idea that the moral saint actually is choosing to go against elements of their character. She's suggesting that they may have sacrificed or removed, suppressed or subsumed aspects of their character. The loving saint, she says, might not go on a fishing trip, or might forgo their fudge sundae for a moral predicament, but maybe they didn't really love those things. And the rational saint foregoes the desire. They may have the desire to fish or to eat the hot fudge sundae, but forgo the desire based on rationality. For example, Kant, you'll remember, Immanuel Kant wrote to his friends and he said, look, thanks for keep inviting me out to dinner, I really enjoy it, but I've got bigger things to do, which is resolve the question of what ought we to do with our lives. If you imagine that, he's a perfect example of a rational saint, someone that sacrificed aspects of his character to become more moral. So amazingly, Susan Wolf is saying, no, we shouldn't always be morally better, always improve in morality. Instead, we might consider there being a vice of deficiency and a vice of excess for morality, and somewhere along the line there's a perfect place for us to be. She's arguing for freedom to develop non-moral virtues, principles or at least informal directives on the basis of which we can develop and evaluate more comprehensive personal ideals. She's arguing a case for a theory that distinguishes among the various roles a person is expected to play within a life. So she's suggesting that a more complete moral theory might not only deal with morality. Alright, well that just about finishes off my quick discussion on Susan Wolf, someone that I hope you will use in the AO2 part of your essay on virtue ethics to wonder whether she has in fact found a way to contribute to virtue ethics but maintain its relevancy today, and you might talk about heroes and saints. She argues that perhaps it's better to aim for this idea of a moral hero, perhaps with temptation, with difficulties, and with character like Han Solo, cultivating his character as well as his virtue, and occasionally breaking the rules. So we're less like a Superman and more like